Huples Cat. Just going to do a bit of an update of stuff that I've spotted in the news lately about the pandemic that I find interesting, and I'm using some reports and I'm going to give you some interpretations of them, because it is fascinating to me how one thing is focused into the public and the scientific mind at a time, and then weeks go by and it's a different thing. Anyway, hold on tight, you'll kind of enjoy this, I think. So the United Kingdom Office for National Statistics compiles a lot of data, and data by itself is just numbers, but it's actually kind of fascinating where it goes. This was actually also partially compiled by Public Health England, which the UK government has decided to get rid of in the middle of the pandemic because reasons. So they're looking at it in terms of infections in private homes. They specifically excluded long-term care, community homes, hospitals. They're looking at rates of infection in ordinary private dwellings. I think that's a really significant thing to be looking at, because that's most people. So who's most at risk? Black and Asian British people who live alone and who work in healthcare or are facing the public, like grocery stores. So you can have a look at some of the charts. The charts are actually quite fascinating. What they found now is that males have the same odds as females, which is different from what they found earlier on. In terms of age group comparison to the 50 to 69-year-old group, it's basically the same odds, almost identical odds for all of the age groups down to the age of 2. If you look at the ethnic group, as they said, compared to white groups, so they're comparing it to a group, so you have to compare group to group, and which group you pick will alter the data somewhat, bear that in mind. But it's pretty obvious that other ethnic groups are so big that who knows what the heck that is. But it is obvious there is a definitive hyper infection in Asian British people. You could argue the same with Black Caribbean British people, but it's actually fairly close to the comparison group. It just has huge outliers. Household size. Basically, compared to a 2-person household, only 1-person households have any statistical odds difference, and they actually have a slightly higher risk. If you've actually been in contact with known or suspected COVID-19 cases, you have a higher risk of infection. But it's not actually hugely higher, and that's important as well. So like I said, it's really interesting what they did. They also looked at where you work. Do you work from home or do you go out to work? And when you look at that, as what you'll see here compared to the work at home group, there's also a huge variation in infection rates depending on where you work and where you live, and also how seriously you take wearing a mask. But if you actually look at it, the not working group is actually almost as at risk from getting this as people who work outside the home. A lot of us would assume that if you're at home and unemployed, your risk is possibly less than people who are at home and working because you've got less money to go out. But it turns out no, you might as well go out to work because you've almost got the same risk. You work in frontline healthcare and you actually face patients. You've got almost twice the risk compared to other frontline workers who don't face patients. Now technically I don't face patients, yet I do, and I also face visitors, and I also go in COVID rooms, but I didn't get my Ontario pandemic pay, but Kitty did. Am I bitter? Yes. So they also have a lot of data on symptoms, and if you have symptoms, what's your infection risk and all the rest of it. One of the critically important things to take away from this is that when you actually look at people who are infected, only 28% of infected individuals have symptoms. This is why mandatory mask wearing in all public areas is very, very important. And I would argue that if you choose not to wear a mask, you could be one of the 72% of infected people who can infect other people who have no symptoms. It really is a no-brainer, and I'm sure over time the anti-mask people are going to be exposed for the stupid people they actually are. It's an airborne droplet pandemic. Put a mask on. It's pretty straightforward. No, masks don't harm you. No, it's not the New World Order trying to control you, make you a sheep. Anyway. Enough of that. As you can see from this one, the percentage of people who are younger who are infected is rising, and it's continuing to rise. Obviously with an airborne pandemic like this, initially it hits nursing homes, it hits the hospitals, and that's where mostly are full of older people who are sick. So then you go look at the data and you go, well yeah, it's older people who've got conditions who get sick and die from this. But then as several months go by and it gets into the general population, the actual infectivity and death rate for the age group starts to appear, and it's becoming more and more deadly in the younger age groups. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, some food for thought. It's always important when you're looking at statistics to bear in mind that statistics aren't always true, because you can interpret the data in different ways, and they're only a snapshot, and it's a snapshot of the past. But clearly, as I've been saying and others have been saying since February, March, put a mask on in public, wash your hands, keep social distance. This is not the time to go to the restaurant. This is not the time to go back to the casino. I know people are very, very bored and have trivial lives and they can't self-entertain or use remote methods of entertainment. But you really should be considering, even if you live in an area like I do, which is northern Toronto, that has a little bit of an outbreak here. But Toronto itself is classified as a bad Canadian outbreak, but if it was in America, you'd be declaring it over and cheering. It's relative to the risk of you catching it and getting death or illness from it, or passing it on to one of the people you like or love, or to anybody in the community. That's what we have to be looking at here. This is not a simplistic disease, it's complicated, and there are different strains. So that's it for me. Remember, in a pandemic, if you don't prepare, tomorrow will always be worse than today. And it will always be worse than today anyway, until the majority of people understand that they need to be wearing masks and they need to be doing social distances, especially when community outbreak in their areas is very low. It's outrageous. The United Kingdom just allowed Portugal to be visited on holiday without quarantine. There's huge numbers of people now online trying to get flights to Portugal. Are these people completely dim? Don't go on holiday during a pandemic. Don't. If you do, go local and keep social distance. To actually fly internationally for a holiday during a pandemic puts you in a special class, a special box of people, in my opinion. The box of people who are going to always bring the rest of us calamity, misery and upset. But you know what? Economy. Interesting, isn't it? Stay safe. Toodles. This was a Cat in a Box production, 2020.